Unequal pay. Harassment of female athletes. Male athletes constantly doing terrible things to women and facing no consequences. Feminism is needed in almost every aspect of a woman's life, and sports happens to be one of them. Men seem to think that they have super strength compared to women, that they'll always be physically superior to us. First, that's just an insanely egotistical and arrogant belief to have. And secondly, it's false. There are in fact several hardcore sports where women outperform men. Here are some of them.
Ultra long distance swimming. Yeah, in studies of multiple races, they found the women's mean swim times to be as much as 10 minutes faster than the men's. You see, women are just more efficient swimmers. They tend to have a higher body fat percentage, which helps with buoyancy, as well as both a longer stroke length and higher stroke rate than men.
People think the reason why male football is more popular than female football is because they have a bigger audience and that the male athletes are somehow better or work harder. Yes, male football has a bigger audience today, but it's not because they're better athletes than female footballers. Here's the reason.
Did you know that women's football was banned in England for 50 years? During the war, the First World War, the men were away fighting. The factories making weapons and munitions were a place for women to work, and they needed pursuits in their leisure time. And that was when football began to be a sport for women, and the game really flourished to the point where there were huge crowds watching women's football in that time. But in 1921, women's football in England was effectively banned. The war was over. The grounds and the pitches were handed back to the men, and the FA back in the day said that football was a quite unsuitable sport for women. In practice, what that meant was women couldn't play in stadiums, on pitches. They were driven back into regular places like parks. 5 whole decades later, in 1971, that ban was finally lifted. Over the next few decades, there was more progress, but of course not as fast as for the men's game. The Sex Discrimination Act meant that women could train to become referees, for example, and then by the late 80s and into the 90s, you could actually watch football, women's football, on TV. We all watch women's football now in exactly the same way as we watch men's football, but there is still so much to be done, especially around pay and equality. It's the only time you can take sides when you work at the BBC.
Men had more time to build an audience and gain more popularity, so of course they'd get more success and higher pay. They literally had a 50-year head start. Whenever a young girl shows interest in football, she's usually discouraged from it. It's only boys who get support to pursue their interest in football and sports in general. Even today, women and girls are banned from playing in sports in several countries like Afghanistan. Caitlyn Clark is an American basketball player. She's broken several records and has greatly helped break boundaries for women's basketball. She was also named as one of the world's 100 most powerful women in 2024 by Forbes. Unsurprisingly, men aren't happy about her success, and as a result, she has been facing a lot of misogynistic hate. Here are some instances.
I cannot stop thinking about the time a bunch of frat boys went to one of Caitlyn Clark's games in high school and started chanting overrated at her, and it backfired so hard. I mean, look how fired up these Chads and Brads are. You know, before the game, they heard the hype about Caitlyn Clark, #1 ranked recruit in the country, and they were all, hey Ken, yes Ken, what if we were like the sixth man today? What if we went to the women's basketball game and absolutely changed the game? You know that Caitlyn Clark girl who pulls up from the logo and swishes it? What if we chanted overrated at her, right? That won't give her any extra motivation that she needs at all. And my favorite part of the highlights from this game is the camera work from the camera person. I mean, they were the real MVP. Every time Caitlyn Clark got a bucket, it was zoom in on Caitlyn and then zoom in on the frat boys, and they got so quiet. They were so loud to start the game. Overrated, dun, 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 dun. And then they got silenced so quick, and they were just stuck there for the entire game in their Brad and Chad outfits. I really need a 30 for 30 where are they now, because you know that they're all just accountants, or they're in finance. But most likely they're in tech sales. Meanwhile, Caitlyn Clark is the best basketball player in the country.
Why do average men think they can beat Caitlyn Clark? And it's not just her.
A 2019 poll found that 1 in 8 UK men think they can score a point in tennis. On Serena Williams. One possible explanation is the Dunning-Kruger effect, where basically low-skilled people think they are better at things than they actually are. And though this phenomenon occurs in people of all genders, it's been shown that women are better at accurately assessing their own ability than men.
And though, yes, the strongest man in the world can pack more muscle onto his frame time than the strongest woman, a stronger athlete doesn't necessarily equal a better athlete.
Like the top male golfer can drive the ball farther, but the top woman golfer is far more accurate. In fact, the top 10 women golfers are more accurate than him. So yeah, sorry my dude, but I'm placing my bets with a woman with over 3,700 career points and NCAA basketball's all-time scoring record.
I don't ever want to hear anyone ever say false allegations against men ruin their careers ever again. Because even the men who are guilty face zero consequences for their actions and are still supported and continue to have successful, long-lasting careers.
Dedicándole ese título de campeona de este planeta, de este maravilloso deporte, dedicándole ese título. Campeona de este planeta, de este maravilloso deporte, dedicándole ese título de campeona de este planeta, de este maravilloso deporte, dedicándole ese título. Campeona de este planeta, de este maravilloso deporte, dedicándole ese título.
To all the men in my comment section defending Rubiales in the Hermoso situation with the kiss after the World Cup final, you guys need to understand one thing. In a different context, this would be the equivalent of your mom, your sister, your daughter, your wife going into her corporate job, doing her job, and her boss coming up to her, grabbing her face and kissing her. If you heard about that or you saw that happen, would you not think that that is completely and utterly offside? Because that's what happened to Hermoso. She went in to do her job at that World Cup final, and that's what happened to her. And it's disgusting. This is a federation and a manager that the Spanish women's side has been fighting against for a long time now and have essentially been ignored. And now we see this happen in public on the biggest stage at the Women's World Cup. And y'all are still defending Rubiales? Come on.
The Spanish women's soccer team won't play in any matches as long as soccer chief Luis Rubiales, who's been under fire for forcibly kissing one of the team's players, is still the president of the country's football federation. A total of 56 players signed a joint statement saying they're refusing to play until the leadership is changed. Rubiales has been facing calls to step down since he grabbed star player Jennifer Hermoso by the head and kissed her on the lips after the team's World Cup win last Sunday. But during an assembly meeting on Friday, he declared,
"No voy a dimitir. No voy a dimitir."
Rubiales denounced what he called fake feminism and said a social murder is being carried out. He also described the kiss as spontaneous, mutual, euphoric, and with consent, and compared it to kissing one of his daughters. As for Hermoso, the player talked about the kiss in an Instagram live shortly after the World Cup final. But a few hours after the kiss, the Royal Spanish Football Federation issued a statement saying Hermoso had called it a, quote, totally spontaneous mutual gesture. In a statement issued through her union on Friday, however, Hermoso states that at no time did she consent to the kiss. On Thursday, FIFA opened disciplinary proceedings against Rubiales. Its disciplinary committee will assess whether he violated the governing body's basic rules of decent conduct.
Now let's talk about another aspect of sports that's totally sexist. The uniforms. This is the men's versus women's outfits for the same 100 meters US, a track and field competition. The men are wearing tank tops and shorts to the knee, while the women are forced to wear pretty much bras and underwear. People try to justify this by saying it's aerodynamics, but it's clearly just about sexualizing women. Look at what the women have to wear, while the men are basically wearing sweatpants. Tell me again that it's for quote-unquote moving easier. The women's wear is practically underwear with a see-through skirt that goes up all the time when skating. The men's and women's gymnastics team posters, hanging side by side, at UC Berkeley. And it's not just the uniforms and skin exposed. The men get to wear pants that cover their legs and feet, and the women don't. The women's uniforms are glittery, sequined, and the men's are not. It's also the way they're posing. The men are just standing. The women are contorting their bodies into what I would guess are supposed to be enticing postures. And the styling. The women have their hair done, and are all wearing makeup. Yes, gymnastics is about flexibility. But it's also about strength and athleticism. The men get to stand and thump their chests and chalk their hands. Why can't the women do the same? Imagine if the men were posing like the women were. Wouldn't it look ridiculous? Imagine if the men were also wearing glittery uniforms that show rear and leave their legs bare. Imagine if it were the men that shaved and are all wearing makeup and hair gel, in addition to the poses the women are doing. Legs kicked high and quarter turns with arms flared. If that image is degrading for the men's team, then it is equally degrading for the women's team too. You're just used to women being degraded. These are the current female volleyball uniforms. The women's Norwegian team decided to wear shorts instead of the usual revealing uniforms and got fined a ridiculous amount of money for wearing them to the games. Yet people try to gaslight women for constantly talking about sexism and misogyny. Meanwhile, female professional athletes are getting fined for wearing shorts. When you compare the men and women, it becomes very clear how sexist the uniforms are. Even the male sports commentators are annoying sexists.
The Paris Olympics is on right now. I'm sure you've been catching the action. They say swimming is very competitive this time, so let's play a little game. Imagine it's day 2 of the games. You're watching a men's swimming event on TV. Meanwhile, a medal ceremony is also underway for the women's 4x100 freestyle relay. Suddenly, you hear this.
Well, the women just finishing off. You know what women are like, hanging around, doing the makeup.
Just a casual dose of sexism. And not even the original kind. We must have heard the makeup joke a million times by now. It wasn't funny the first time, it's not funny centuries later, but that's Olympics commentary for you. Look at the most common words that are used for women: aged, older, pregnant, married, and unmarried. Now look at the words that are used for men: fastest, strong, big, and great. Do you see the difference here? Men are judged and described based on their performance, but women are not. Often they're treated as eye candy.
The commitment was insane.
My.
Wow.
How's the water angle flick? Just the feeling that you get.
I mean, she was so deep. Look at this takeoff, up underneath the lip, drives through that second section, comes...
Well done to the women for winning their own competitions, but you just cannot compare the men's game to the women's game.
What do you mean?
You're essentially saying the women are better than the men. It's two different standards of sport. I hate those comments saying, what about the Lionesses? They went one further.
But they did. They have.
They're two different competitions and two different sports to a very different standard.
They had to try and stop this woman from beating them. Rally driving was a sport for men, not for women. Don't like to be the first man to lose against a girl.
Give everything I have inside, to try to rally, to try to go flat out.
This is what I was talking about earlier. Women don't get the same amount of support as men to pursue their passion in sports and other male-dominated fields. As a result, they end up starting later in life or never even starting at all. Now onto the topic of unequal pay in sports. Amber talks about a solution to this problem that seems very effective.
I have to talk about the WNBA.
Only a handful of women that make around $115,000. And those are huge players like Skylar Diggins-Smith, Brittany Griner, but all the rest of the women make around $70,000. And if you compare that to the lowest paid player in the NBA, $840,000.
And that's just disrespectful. I made that video in 2021 for Women's History Month because I wanted to talk about the difference between the pay of women's basketball and US women's soccer versus the men's pay. And dudes were coming at me crazy in the comments talking about women's sports are boring and nobody watches. But I wonder how they're feeling now. We saw what happened during March Madness. Women got 3 times the viewership and sold out tickets, and now these women are getting endorsement deals, sponsorship deals, jerseys are getting sold out, and ticket sales are going up in the WNBA. So now it's time to close that pay gap. All women's sports really needed was an investment because the NBA teams own the WNBA teams, and they pay out 50% of their revenue to the NBA players and only 25% of the revenue to the WNBA players. And I get it. Most people are like, oh, well, does it make that much money? Well, why didn't we invest to see what it could be? And now these women are demanding the attention that they deserve, and I love to see it, y'all. So these days of having a WNBA player make the same as or less than NBA floor cleaners, or the highest WNBA player making 3 times less than a mascot in the NBA, those days are over, baby. Like I said before, and I'm gonna say it again. Listen, I need y'all to make sure you support the WNBA, support the Sparks, get your tickets, and let's show up and show out all season. I'll see y'all there.
O que é legal é que quando eu comecei a jogar, eu não tinha um ídolo no feminino. Vocês não mostravam o jogo do feminino. Como que eu ia ver? Como que eu ia entender que eu poderia chegar a uma seleção, me tornar uma referência? Hoje a gente sai na rua e as pessoas param, os pais param e falam: a minha filha te adora, ela quer ser igual você. Ah, e não é só com a Marta, é com outros atletas também. Então hoje a gente tem as nossas próprias referências. Isso não teria acontecido se a gente tivesse parado nos primeiros obstáculos. Então, é uma persistência contínua que não foi só... que não começou só comigo, mas começou com muita gente lá atrás, mas que a gente tem muito orgulho. E a gente pede muito para que a nossa geração continue a fazer isso, continue a inspirar cada vez mais meninas, meninos, não importa a idade. A vozinha lá que torce pro Corinthians, né? A tiazinha, acho que é a vovó das meninas lá do Timão, é um exemplo. E é lógico que eu fico muito feliz em ver tudo isso, né? Porque há 20 anos atrás... Em 2003, ninguém conhecia a Marta. Era a minha primeira Copa. 20 anos depois, a gente virou referência para muitas mulheres no mundo inteiro. Não só no futebol, no jornalismo também. Que a gente vê aqui muitas mulheres aqui no jornalismo, o que a gente não via antigamente. Então, a gente acabou abrindo portas, né, para a igualdade. E... espero que eu tenha respondido a tua pergunta. Obrigado. Depois de me fazer chorar. Já tenho a fama de chorona, pô. Tava me segurando aqui, mas não deu.
I don't know her. I've never seen her before. No clue. No.
Yeah, Katie Taylor. Katie Taylor.
Is that Katie Taylor? Katie Taylor.
We need to stop saying people don't watch women's sports. At this year's US Open, which was, by the way, the 50th anniversary of pay equity at that event, the women's final between Coco Gauff and Aryna Sabalenka brought in 3.4 million viewers. The men's final, by contrast, brought in only 2.3 million. The women's March Madness tournament earlier this year brought in over 9.9 million viewers for the final between Iowa and Louisiana State, making it the most streamed sports event to date on ESPN Plus for either men or women. Last year's European Football Championships saw more than 87,000 fans turn out for the women's final, which was more than for any other game in the entire tournament for men or women. The women's volleyball team at the University of Nebraska recently set a record for most in attendance for a women's sporting event ever at over 92,000 people. People want to watch women's sports. All we have to do is let them.
Listen, there's so much money to be had by including women in sports, and I'm going to give you a great example of how. This is Bianca Bustamante. She's 19 years old and she is a pro racing driver. Now, Bianca is on the path to make it as an F1 driver. And the cool thing about Formula One racing is that it is one of the few sports where when you get to the top of the pack, there is no gender separation, meaning that anyone can compete for the 20 seats that are available in Formula One. Now, Bianca at 19 is making massive history. Right before the US Grand Prix, where I took this picture, McLaren announced that they had signed Bianca to their driver development program. What that means is they are about to spend millions of dollars on Bianca's development as a driver with the hopes of her eventually driving for them in F1. That is incredibly exciting for so many reasons, because the thing about Formula One is that it costs money. And by signing Bianca to their development program, it means that they're not only investing in her, but they're telling sponsors that she's worth investing in as well as women drivers as a whole. Now, why am I saying that there's money being left on the table by not including women? Well, it was announced that Bianca will be one of 3 female drivers competing in the Macau GP. And something that you'll notice across the board on any of the posts about these female drivers competing is that comments are often making fun of these young women for wearing makeup while racing. But that's actually paying off for Bianca. Because as you can see here in prime placement, she's being sponsored by Anastasia of Beverly Hills, a very prominent makeup brand. And the more women we see sponsored like this, the more women we're going to see watching Formula One, which means there's going to be more space for sponsors like this. And for a sport as expensive as Formula One, having that kind of sponsorship is a great idea.
Come watch Montreal break the world record for PWHL attendance. Are you kidding me? 21,105 amazing supporters of women's hockey. I got so emotional thinking about how many young girls are inspired by this moment. The battle between Montreal and Toronto was absolutely insane. Historic moments, epic vibes, sponsored by Barbie. Are you kidding me? Thousands of young girls in the audience getting so inspired, and goals left, right, and center. If I'm in town, there's no way I'm missing a single game. These are incredible.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.
We're the only animal on the planet that pretends like the female of our species is weak. Have you guys ever met a woman? Not weak at all. No. Could you imagine ever pretending like any other animal was weak just because it was the girl of that animal? You'd never be standing on the beach going, "Oh my god, I can't believe that Larry just got eaten by a girl shark."